Begin the current Daf, Mesech Yoma Daf Mem Daled. Begin on the bottom of Gimel of Beis, 2 lines up on the bottom of it. We begin explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which the Kohen Gadol slaughtered his par, and they started mixing it. And we explain exactly where they mixed it, and continue explaining the halacha of our Mishnah. Shiur Kosman V'Kazik and Cheskel Torrent and Davachem Shem is running for today's Daf. Discuss for Tinnik Ben Yehudis. Some of these we're going to discuss in today's Daf are. The pasuk says, "B'chol adam lo yeh ba'oil moed b'voil l'chap b'kodesh." Torah forbids anyone from being in the heichel while the Kohen Gadol is performing the hakataris, and we discuss specific in details regarding where and when that is. We find differences between the avodah in Kippur and the avodah during the year. And the Gemara ends up by discussing the various types of golds that exist in the world and the differences between them. So in the important terms, the concepts are lashon hara, which is talking bad about someone, whether it's true or not true. Par Kohen Mashiach is when the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake in halacha. He has to bring a special carbon as a Par Kohen Mashiach. Par Ham Davish al Tzibur is when the entire Jewish people make a mistake based on the ruling of the Sanhedrin. Each tribe has to bring their own carbon. Tzira Avodah Zarah is the same thing when it relates to Avodah Zarah. They bring a higot. And the concept of Torah Chasa al B'Manyin Shel Yisrael, the Torah is very concerned about the Jewish people's money, even by Mitzayra, by the Tzaras, the bias they get out all the Klicheres. Definitely we have to be concerned about, as a Meritz, this Yiddish Geld. So we begin the current Daf, we begin on Gimel Beis, the second line up in the bottom of the Yomim. The Mishnah had said that the Kohen Gadol, he shechted his par, then he gave it to someone to mix it because he didn't right away spray the blood. He actually went to do the Ketairis, and only after the Ketairis that he brought Lefnai v'lefnim, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, then he went to get his blood and sprayed that inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So someone was mixing it, as the Mishnah said, on the Roivid HaRavi Shebehechel, the fourth row of the Hechel. So the Gemara asks, how's it possible that somebody was in the fourth row of the Hechel while he went to bring the Ketairis? But B'Ksiv, the pasuk says, in the Yikra V'chol Adam Lo Yeh Ba'oil Moed, nobody's allowed to be in the oil moed, the tent of the assembly, which the Gemara later on is going to explain, is talking about during the Ketairis. And you're telling me that somebody's mixing the blood on the fourth row of the Heichel when he's going to bring the Ketairis. That's what no one's allowed to be in the Heichel.
Is it outside the Heichel?
I'm saying, but that we're going to explain that that's outside, but the simple translation of the words of the Mishnah were, Harevid Harvi Shebe Heichel. Sounds like it's in the Heichel. Now, Rabbi Yehudi says, Tani Shel Heichel. Meaning, when you're leaving the Heichel to the Azara, you count the rows, and the fourth row to the Heichel is where the guy would be mixing the blood. But you're right, nobody was in the Heichel and at this stage of the day because he's going to bring the Ketairis and no one's allowed to be in the Heichel. Which, that gets us into a whole discussion into this halacha about no one being in the Heichel at the time when the Kohen Gadol was bringing the Ketairis. What's the source of this halacha? So we mentioned the pasuk, he says, B'chol adam lo yeh, which some take out the next words, ba'oil moed, because that would seem to be the next part of the drasha. But no one's allowed to be when he's bringing the Ketairis. As a continues of Memdal Medal, Yochel Avila Ba'azara, you would think that, okay, no one's allowed to even be in the courtyards when the Kohen's bringing back the Ketairis Lefnai V'lefnim inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Tamalim, but says, no, ba'oil moed, no one's allowed to be in the Heichel when he's bringing the Ketairis Lefnai V'lefnim. Now, ainly Ela ba'oil moed, Sheba Midbar. I would only know the tent of the assembly that was in the desert, what we call the Mishkan. Because it says ba'oil moed. But Shiloi, when the Mishkan was later on in Shiloi, Ubeis Elam man, when they ultimately built the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, Minayin, how do you know the halach applies even over there? So that pasuk over there says, when it says B'chol adam lo yeh ba'oil moed, it says B'vayoy l'chaper ba'kodesh, when he comes to atone ba'kodesh in a holy place. So here it doesn't say anymore the word ba'oil moed. It says ba'kodesh. So any holy place, any heichel, even that of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, ainly Ela B'Shas HaKetara, I would only know that it's when he's bringing the Ketairis, which later on the Gemara is going to explain, where do you see anything over here that are about Ketairis? It just says, when he comes L'chaper, by Kodesh, until he leaves, no one's allowed to be there. How do you say anything about specifically the Ketairis? That we're going to explain shortly. But that's what the Bride says, I would only know that no one's allowed to be there when he's bringing the incense. How do you know that even when he's giving the gifts of blood, which he brings from the power that he brings for himself, and the Sorah Lashem, that he brings their blood also inside, how do you know no one's allowed to be in the Heichel at that point too? The pasuk teaches in the same pasuk says B'voy l'chaper, and he's coming to atone. There's a kapara from the damim of his power and the Sorah Lashem. Now, I would only know when he's coming in. Because it says l'chaper b'kodesh, when it says B'voy, when he's coming in l'chapa b'kodesh? How do I know that even b'yitzias minayin, that when he's leaving also, even up until that point, no one's allowed to be inside? Tamalem says adseis until he leaves. Now the end of the pasuk says v'chiber ba'adoyin, he's going to atone for himself, ba'ad beisayim, for his family, ba'ad kol kal yisrael, for the whole Jewish people. Which that teaches us in the order kaparasa kedemes. Some take out the next words because it's really one atonement, but kaparasa kedemes l'chaparas beisay. His atonement is before the atonement of his family. Kaparas beisay kedemes l'kaparas achav kahanim. The atonement for his family is before the atonement of the rest of the kahanim. Like we had mentioned, first he does the vidah for himself and his family, then he does for the kahanim. And the kaparas achav kahanim kedemes l'chaparas kol kal yisrael. The atonement that he has for his brothers, the kahanim, comes before the atonement of the whole Jewish people because he does the Sar Hashem after he does the path. Okay. Now the Gemara goes back to explain this brayse in detail. Omamar, it said in the brayse, I would only know that the isra of having somebody else in the Olmoid in the Heichel, when the Kohen Gadol is inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, is only when he's bringing the Ketairis Lefnai V'Lefnim. Says Gemara, my mashma, read the pasuk, you'll see that it doesn't tell us anything about the Ketairis. Why are you saying, I would only know the Ketairis? How do I know Mandamim? Oh, we have to bring it from the word L'chaper. We didn't see anything about Ketairis. So Amar Rava v'chein Amar B'Yitzchak B'Abdimi v'chein Amar B'Laz, this is Omikron, because the pasuk says, this same pasuk that we keep on quoting, it says v'chiper ba'adoy v'ad beisoy v'akol kal Yisrael. The pasuk ends off, he's going to atone for himself, his family, ganz klal Yisrael. Now, and that's in this pasuk that's telling us no one's allowed to be in the Oyel Mayed when he's doing this avodah b'voy l'chavan b'kodesh. Now, Ezeu kapara, which atonement sheshav aloi ula beisoy ula achav hakanim ula kal Yisrael? Which one atonement? Not like the way we dash from before, that he's before and then the kanim are before, and it sounds like that it's one avodah that everyone's going to get part of this atonement. Which one is it? That's the sacrificing of the incense, because regarding the matan damim of the karbanas, they're not all the same. The par that he brings the bull atones for him and the other kanim. The Sar Hashem is for Klal Yisrael, not for the kanim. So therefore, they're not on the same element for atonement regarding the matan damim. They're only the same by the Ketairis that they share the same atonement. That's how you know it's during the avodah of the Ketairis. Now the Gemara asks for Ketairis mechaper. Is that really so? The atonement that comes through the Ketairis? But it's not like a matan damim. Says the Gemara, yes. The Tani Reb Chananya taught. Lamanu the Ketairis mechaperes. We learn that the incense atones. Shem, like it says in the pasuk Imba Midbar, it says that Aaron took, like Moshe Rabbeinu had said, when there was a Magefa, he ran into the Kahal, and the Negev, the Magefa that started in the people, so Aaron ran in, he put the incense, and he atoned for the people and stopped the Magefa. Now, what is this? So it atones? For what sins do the incense atone? Alashon hara, on the evil tongue, regarding slander, because that story where the Magefa was by Kairach. Kairach had said Lashon Hara, like it says in Mamid B'Yazayin, Atma Misa V'Sam Hashem, you killed the Jewish people, again, whether it's true or not true, saying bad things about another person with Lashon Hara, and that's what caused the Magif, and that's what the Ketairis was coming to atone for. Why? So the Gemara tells us, because Yavi Davish B'Chashay, let something that is done in silence, because as the Teisi Yeshanim explains, the Ketairis was totally silent. In contrast, even by the Matan Damim, L'fnai V'Lefnim, the Kohen Gadol was talking. Achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim. The one avodah that nothing was being said, was totally still, was the Ketairis. So let that Ketairis come along, and atone for another action that's also very still. Because like Rashi says, General Lashon says, in a whisper. You're scared? Oh yeah. And the Chavetz Chaim says that, look at this, wow, the one avodah, the holiest avodah, the Gans Yar, Ketairis, Lefnai V'Lefnim, what did it have to atone for? For Lashon Hara. That's what it's for, and that was mamish the Gresta Avodah. Let something that's done in silence atone for something else that's done in silence. Now, going back to what we explained regarding this pasuk, this halacha of no one being in the heichel during the Ketairis and during the Matan Damim, when the Kohen Gadol would be Lefnai V'Lefnim, it's not hasik. The end of the mission set to Kalim, that it's not only that you have to not be in the heichel. Parshin mibein ulam mezbeach. That actually they pull back, not even to be in the area. This is the Kodesh HaKodeshim, this is the Heichel, and this is the Ulam, which is the antechamber, like the vestibule, like the hallway that you come into. And then this is the area Bein Ulam L'Mizbech, there's a lot of steps going up. This area, so the Torah tells you not to be in the Heichel, which we'll discuss in a moment what's the Ulam, but seemingly that's also part of the Heichel. Not only that, but they said no one even to be in the area between the ulam, between the antechamber and the mizbeach, from that whole 22 amas that's between them. B'shas haktara, at the time of the burning of the incense. Now, that Mishnah is explained by Omer Belazar. He qualifies that Mishnah. He says, we only said this halacha when they're burning the Ketores in the heichel, which is by the Mizbeach HaPanimi, this little square here in the middle, which is done every single morning and evening, pras b'shachris and pras b'nabayim. Now, the reason for that is because this area of the Mizbeach is technically close to the heichel. The ulam is like considered either one of the same, as we'll see in the base of this area, or the same as this area, but it's considered contiguous, it's considered very near that. When the Kohen God is bringing one tziyah and Yom Kippur, the Ketores in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, then no. Then then from the heichel, which is near to that, so then parsha you have to separate from the heichel. But from the area between the ulam and the zbeach, which is very far, that loy parshi, that people did not have to separate from at the time when they was bringing the Ketores. That's how Rabbi Loza qualifies that Mishnah. This that was saying that at the time of the Ketores you have to separate not only from the heichel but also from the ulam and the zbeach, is only the Ketores of all year round, which this is considered nearby. But when he was bringing it, or whatever was considered very far, you don't have to separate from the area ben ulam and zbeach. Now, Moser Rav Adabar Abba, from Al-Kedi, this is a very hard to read brisa, but we'll translate it, and the Gemara is going to have a change of heart how to interpret it. But the Gemara is going to ask from this brisa as follows: on Rabbi Lazar, he says, "Kashem sheparshin mi bein ulam lemizbeach b'shas haktara." Just like you have to separate from this area between the antechamber and the mizbeach at the time of the haktara, which we just quoted from the Mishnah set this Caleb, that you have to separate at the time of the burning of the Ketores. Kach parshin b'shas matan par kohen Mashiach. So too, we're extending this halacha also for other certain avodas. When there's the matan damim of the par kohen Mashiach, which is for any one of the averos in the Torah that a kohen gadol makes a mistake, he makes a ruling for himself, and he does based on his erroneous ruling. The halacha is that he brings a special carbon called par kohen Mashiach, and the matan damim is done on the pareiches. Generally, karbanos are done on the outside. There are certain karbanos which we're quoting now. They're called the parm hadesrafim, which they are actually burnt, and the blood is actually sprayed inside on the pareiches on the mizbech hazav. So too, par helm davishal tzibur, when the entire Jewish people make a mistake based on the erroneous ruling of the Sanhedrin, they have to bring a special par of helm dav, which was alluded from them the halacha, and the sira b'tzkachavim, which is similar when the tzibur does avodah zarah based on the ruling of the bezin. So they have to bring a par as an oila and a sar as a chatas, like it says in Parashat Shlach. And that sar, that he goes, the blood is sprayed on the pareiches, and again, this carbon is not eaten. It's what's called a permanent strafim, as we learn out. So, just like we said, that when the Ketores is being brought, and we'll see in a second what the question is, that you have to separate ben meinul mizbeach, so too, when the permanent strafim are being brought, and the blood is being sprayed inside the heichel, you also have to separate from this area ben ulam mizbeach. Now, continues the brisa. Now, hamamayli yesh ben ha'heichel. Then now, what's the difference? What's the elevated status of the heichel ben ulam mizbeach to the area between the ulam and the mizbeach? In other words, like Rashi and Taisus both explain, meaning in regards to the laws of prisha, that you have to separate. You can't be in the area when a holy avodah is being done. What's the difference between the heichel and ben ulam mizbeach? You seem to equate the two. That whenever you have to separate from the heichel, you got to separate from the area ben ulam mizbeach too. Says the brisa, Ella, I'll tell you the differences. Sheba heichel, in the sanctuary itself, when you separate from it, parshin, you separate bein b'shas haktara, whether it's a time of the burning of the incense, or bein shalei b'shas haktara, or whether it's not at the time of the burning of the incense. Now, there's an equation over here. Rashi explains, the Gemara assumes right now, that whether it's at the time of the burning of the Ketores, which is lifnai b'lifnim, and whether it's not at a time of burning, what? Of lifnai b'lifnim, but rather it's a time of the matan damim lifnai b'lifnim. We're equating over here. We're saying just like this, so to this. We're saying just like you have to separate from the Ketores, so you have to separate from these karbanos. So we're saying, so what's the difference if that seems to be, you're saying for Keteris and Matan Damim, you have to separate from the Benul Mizbech, so how's that different than the Heichel? So they'll tell you what. By the Heichel, that you have to separate Bein B'Shas Haktara and Ben Shalei B'Shas Haktara. Now, which Haktara are you talking about? We're talking about the Haktara of Lefnai v'Lefnim. And we know that's the halacha. That's the halacha the pasuk we brought when the Keter is being brought by the Kohen Gadol Lefnai v'Lefnim and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So you have to separate from the Heichel. That halacha is even when it's Shalei B'Shas Haktara. Shalei B'Shas Haktara. So what are you talking about? When is he separating? Oh, something else, not at the Keteris. When there's Matan Damim. When the Matan Damim is being brought, when he brings the Sa'ar Hashem, when he brings the power and he sprays it between the staves of the Aron and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, so then he has to separate. But when you're in the area between the Ul Mizbeach, then you don't have to separate because of Lefnai v'Lefnim, when there's an avodah being done in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, Ella b'Shas Haktar, only at the time of the Keteris, but not Shalei B'Shas Haktar. What Shalei B'Shas Haktar? When some other avodah is not the Keteris, which is B'Shas Matan Damim. When the blood is being sprayed here, then you don't have to separate Benul Mizbech. That's the difference between Heichel and Benul Mizbech. Heichel, you have to separate Ben B'Shas Haktar, Ben Shalei B'Shas Haktar. What does Shalei B'Shas Haktar mean according to what the Gemara is saying right now? Means, not Keteris. But I could be at the Heichel. When am I not allowed to be Shalei B'Shas Haktar? Well, I'm not allowed to be there all day. No one said that. It means some other avodah, not Keteris, but the Matan Damim. Here, Benul Mizbech, then you only have to separate B'Shas Haktar. But Shalei B'Shas Haktar when there's Matan Damim, then you don't have to separate. But that's what the Gemara's question is under Belazar. But B'Shas Haktar Mia Parshi. But you tell me that at the time the Keteris is being brought, you do have to separate from the Iri Benul Mizbech. My love, isn't it talking about like what it seems like from the whole Brisa? B'Shas Haktar D'Lefnai V'Lefnim. When you bring the Keteris in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, then you tell me you do have to separate Benul Mizbech. That refutes Rabbi Lazar, who he had qualified the Mishnah Masechtas Kalim, that said no, they separate Benul Mizbech is not when you bring it Lefnai V'Lefnim, it's only when you bring the Keteris in the Heichel. So, but here you see that when the Keteris are being brought, you have to separate Benul Mizbech, which Taisus wonders and says that, as we're going to see on the Beis, this whole halacha Benul Mizbech is only Gezer. The Torah only tells you can't be in the oil Moed. No one says anything Benul Mizbech. So it's a Gezer. So why are we making a Gezer Benul Mizbech at the time of the Haktiris, and not at the time of Hazor, spraying the blood, which we're calling Shalei B'Shas Haktar, but they're both learned from the same pasuk. So that says Taisus that, but Lamaisa Keteris is more explicit in the pasuk. Like we said, when it says they said I told Kal Yisrael, referring to the Keteris. But Hazor is only from a Yetura, from an extra word, L'chaper, that we learn out that it says L'chaper, from that we learn out, it's referring to the Matan Damim. But since it's more explicit regarding the Keteris, so we made the Gezer Benul Mizbech specifically for the Keteris. But that's the question under Belazar, that you see that you have to separate Benul Mizbech even when you have the Keteris from Fnai V'Lefnim. Says Gemara, no, a different equation. We're talking about B'Shas Haktar the Heichel. We're talking about when the Keteris are brought in the Heichel. That's when we're saying you have to separate from the Benul Mizbech. And this is what the Brisa was saying. Just like, now this is what it's an equation. Just like you separate from the area Benul Mizbech at the time of the Keteris of the Heichel, so too you have to separate at the time of the Matan Damim, which Matan Damim? Of the Par Kohen Mashiach, like we're saying, which is also in the Heichel, which is nearby to it. But no one's saying that you have to go ahead and separate from the area Benul Mizbech when you're bringing the Keteris of an Avon. Then says Gemara, if that's the case, then you're telling me that the halacha of the Brisa, that just like you're separating Benul Mizbech at the time of the Keteris, is going into the Keteris of the Heichel and not on the Lefnai V'Lefnim. So when the Brisa asks, Hama Mala, then what type of Mala do you have from the Heichel over the Benul Mizbech? What? There is no other Mila, only this that you end up saying that, Shaloi B'Shas Haktar of Lefnai V'Lefnim, that you said that, in the Heichel you're going to separate, like we said, Bein B'Shas Haktar, whether it's the Keteris of the Heichel or Lefnai V'Lefnim, and you said Bein Shaloi B'Shas Haktar, which we said, what does it mean Shaloi B'Shas Haktar? It means when there's Matan Damim, which is either blood, whether the Heichel Lefnai V'Lefnim, because that's what you have to explain now, because we said that the Damim is going on also the Par Kohen Mashiach and all those other ones. So in the Heichel, you have to separate no matter what it is, the Ketairis or the Dam, whether of the Kodesh HaKodeshim or that of the Heichel. But you're telling me, Bein Ul Mizbeach, you don't separate, quote unquote, Shaloi B'Shas HaKtara, which is what? Is the Shas of the Matan Damim of Lefnai V'Lefnim. Only at the time of the Ketairis of the Heichel. So B'Suloi, so why is the Brisa saying that that's the one difference? Between them, there's no other difference? Ha'iko ha'malo. But what do you mean? You have, as Rashi explains, a mila of the Heichel over the Bein Ul Mizbeach, even B'Shas HaKtar there's a mila. I mean, you have to come along and tell me, the difference between them will be the mila of the Prisha of the Heichel will be what's called Shaloi B'Shas HaKtar. What do you mean? Even B'Shas HaKtar there's a mila. Why? Because the Ilum Heichel, whereas in regards to the Heichel, Parshi, Bein B'Shas HaKtar day, you have to separate whether it's from its own Ketaris of the Heichel, whether it's brought every single day, and Bein B'Shas HaKtar Lefnai V'Lefnim, whether it's the Ketaris of the Kodesh HaKodeshim Lefnai V'Lefnim. V'Ilum Bein Ul Mizbeach, in contrast, the Iri Bein Ul Mizbeach, Loi Parshi El B'Shas HaKtar the Heichel. You only have to separate when you bring the Ketaris of the Heichel, not the Ketaris of Lefnai V'Lefnim. Why don't you say that as a difference? Why are you coming on to Shaloi B'Shas HaKtar as a difference? You have in the actual pasuk itself, in the primary halacha of separating b'shas haktara, you only have to separate from the lefnai v'lefnim from the heichel. Bein Ul Mizbeach is only regarding the ketaris of the heichel, not of the lefnai v'lefnim. So why don't you say that as a difference of a mala? Why are you asking? So mala, yes, and you have to come on to say shaloi b'shas haktara. Even b'shas haktara you have a difference. Says the Gemara, you're right. Hakatani. Actually, this is what the Brisa is saying. This that we're saying that b'shas haktara, that means b'shas haktara the heichel, and when it says shaloi b'shas haktara, it meant shaloi b'shas haktara of the heichel. We had it up until now been reading. Shaloi b'shas haktara meant that b'shas matan dama. No, we're changing our understanding. Shaloi b'shas haktara means to say shaloi b'shas haktara of the heichel, rather it's b'shas haktara of lefnai v'lefnim. That's what we're saying. Elo shebeheichel, the difference is, the mila is that by the heichel, parshin you separate from the heichel bein b'shas haktara, whether it's the ketaris of the heichel, and when it says and bein shaloi b'shas haktara that the Tana says, it means ubein shaloi b'shas haktara of its own ketaris, meaning, but you even separate from the heichel when you bring the ketaris of lefnai v'lefnim. Whereas the bein ul mizbeach in parshin we don't separate as a ketin tam and beis. When we say only time haktara, meaning we say only its own ketaris of the heichel. But when you can bring the ketaris of the lefnai v'lefnim, then you're not going to separate from the ear bein ul mizbeach. So again, it's not like the way we translate initially. Shaloi b'shas haktara meant, you mean not during the ketaris, but meaning it's regarding when you're doing the dam. No, and that's why we thought it was talking about lefnai v'lefnim. No, we're talking about when we say bein b'shas haktara, bein shaloi b'shas haktara, we're talking about the ketaris in the heichel. There, you have to separate from the heichel, no matter which ketaris it is. Bein b'shas haktara of the heichel, bein shaloi b'shas haktara of the heichel, meaning, but rather it's out of Kodesh HaKodeshim. But bein ul mizbeach, there you don't have to separate when it, like Rabbi Lazar said, from the ketaris of lefnai v'lefnim. That's what we mean when we say bein shaloi b'shas haktara, mean not the ketaris of the heichel, but rather it's the ketaris of lefnai v'lefnim. Then you wouldn't have to separate according to Rabbi Lazar. Problem is, the Gemara has another question. You're saying that's the only mala? But there's another ma'ila that the heichel has over bein ul mizbeach, because the ilam heichel, whereas in regards to the heichel parshi, you separate from that area. No one's allowed to be there. Bein b'kedusha d'gei. What that means to say, like Rashi says, whether it's his own sanctity, meaning whether it's matan damim that's done in the heichel, like we said, that's the power held in davar shel tzibur. Those are brought into the heichel. And bein b'kedusha lefnai v'lefnim, whether it's a sanctity, meaning whether it's matan damim of lefnai v'lefnim, which is that's referring to Sar Hashem and the power of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. V'ilu bein ul mizbeach, whereas regards to the area between the interchange and the altar, like parshei l'b'kedusha heichel, it's only when you bring the matan damim of the heichel, like we said, kashem sheparshin bein ul mizbeach b'shas haktara, which we say is haktara the heichel. So you have to be separate when you bring the power helm that b'shal tzibur, and we said because those are nearby, the area bein ul mizbeach is nearby to the heichel. But when it's the dam that's brought in lefnai v'lefnim on Yom Kippur, that you didn't have to separate bein ul mizbeach. So that's another difference. Why do you say that, Milo? So Omar Rabba says you're right. Shem prisha achasi. It's all one Milo. It's one element of separation because that's the same halacha. We're saying from the heichel you have to separate even because of lefnai v'lefnim. That's what I mean. Whether it's because of Aktar, whether it's because of matan dama. But you don't separate because of lefnei v'lefnim at all. So once we already told you because of the Keteris of lefnei v'lefnim you don't have to separate. So I don't have to tell you because matan damim, it's the same thing. We're saying it's only that which is nearby to it, not which is another step removed. Now, the Gemara quotes this Bryce Amamar, and we quote on Aleph. We said that just like you separate Benul Mizbeach at the time of the Keteris, which we explained according to Belazar means of that of the Heichel, not like the Gemara had asked me this question thinking it's even referring to the Keteris of Nebuchadnezzar. Kind of question, so we said, so do you have to separate B'shas Matan Parkoin Mashiach when the gifts of the blood are done for the Kohen Gadol in the Heichel, the Parham Dabashol Tzibur, regarding the Parham Dabashol Tzibur, Ubasir but it's Kachavim net of the Hiko. So the Gemara asked, Manolo, where do we know this halacha from? First of all, that we had said that when the dam is brought, lefnei v'lefnim, we learned it from Lechaper to teach you that, then you have to separate from the Heichel. But where do you know that when the dam is brought in the Heichel, you have to separate? Moreover, how do you know even rabbinic, this halacha at all, are separating then extended to the Benul Mizbeach? So Amar Padasi says, Asi kapar Yom Kippur. We learn Gzeir Shava from Yom Kippur. Just like Yom Kippur, the way the halacha is when the matan dam is being brought, you have to separate from the Heichel. So too, where it says over here by these karbanas, which Taisa discusses, some psukim seem not to have the word kapara. You could learn that from a different language. Could you extend it further? But each one of these say the word kapara by them, by Parkei Mashiach, but it's Kechavim, and therefore it's going to have the same halacha. Like just like Yom Kippur, you have to separate from the Heichel when you're bringing these avodas, including the matan damim. So too, these karbanas, which also say kapara, you have to separate from the Heichel, and by extension, from rabbinic law, as we're going to discuss right now, the area ben ulam lamazbeach. Now, Amar Acha Ba'ava, so he says that Shema Minah, what we could infer from this halacha, from the fact that we were geyser, that between the ulam and mizbeach you have to separate, that malas, these statuses that the Chachamim made in the Mishnah Mesechtas came in the first parak, that the Mishnah there teaches that the Temple Mount Har Bayis is holier than Yerushalayim. The Chayil is the area which is surrounded with a fence is holier than the rest of the Temple Mount. There's this Nashim which is further in is holier than the Chayil. There's this Yisrael which is 11 amas more and that's holier than the Ezes Nashim. There's this Kahanim is holier than the Ezes Yisrael. The area between Ulam Mizbeach is holier than the Azara. The Heichel is holier than the area between Ulam Mizbeach. Must be all those levels are Daraisa biblical. Why? And that is V'hachin Gemiri because that was the traditional Halacha Mesh Messina. So therefore, when the pasuk tells us that you have to be pirish, you have to separate, we said you only have to separate from the heichel. Like the pasuk says, Yomai. You only have to separate from the Yomai. Now the Rabbanan came along and they were geyser, ben ulam lemazbech, because maybe you might walk into the heichel. Now, but we did not extend the gzeira for the rest of the azara, because the area ben ulam lemazbech is a different kedusha. And the rest of the Azara is a different Kedusha. So, but Ulam Mizbech is itself a Gezer. If you would make the rest of the Azara forbidden too, that would be what's called the Gezer, which we don't do. So it must be that these elevated statuses that one have over the other, like that Ben Ulam Mizbech has over the rest of the Azara, must be Deraisa, because the Gemara explains. Because the Isa Gedar that Ibn entertained to say that these milas that were said over there are Dirabanan, but biblical, actually, Ben Ulam Mizbech and the rest of the Azara is all the same Kedusha. So the Maishno ben Mizbech, then what's the difference that you tell me that you have to separate ben Mizbech with Dilma? Because Dilma Mikra Ba'ayli, it might happen, and that someone might walk into the Heichel, which now going to be as the pasuk explicitly says, Mikul Azar Naman there for sure. And then you should separate from the rest of the Azar for the same Gezerah, because it's all one Gezerah. Dilma Mikra Ba'ayli, maybe it's going to happen, you're going to walk in. So says Gemara, no, it's not a riot. Maybe really the miles only do Rabban. So then what's the difference? The difference is the area between the ulam mizbeach, since there's nothing in the way. This area of the ulam mizbeach, you're right here. You can walk right in. You don't see any difference. Whereas the azara, the rest of the courtyard, you have the mizbeach, the ad mizbeach, which is in interruption between where you are standing and the heichel. So Mikra Milsa is recognizable as a separate area. We're not concerned that a person is going to just walk right in. So it's not a raya. It could be that the miles only drabanan, but still will differentiate, even though biblical there's no difference. It will only be because in Ulam Mizbeach where there's nothing in the way, whereas the rest of the Azar that you have the Mizbeach in the way. A similar type of inference that's rejected, Amar Rava. Rava says, Shma mina, what we can infer from the fact that we made a gezeira in ulam mizbeach that you have to separate from that area, that kedushas ulam vehechel must be that the sanctity of the hechel and the antechamber, that they're chad milsi, that they're the same thing, meaning that the ulam is also considered quote unquote the olam mayid, and that you have to separate bein ulam mizbeach, because maybe you're going to go into the ulam, and then when you go into the ulam, you're going to be violating lo yeh ba'olam mayid, because the ulam is the same thing as the hechel. Because the Isaac and if you would think to say that the ulam is a separate sanctity from the hechel, so that ulam gufe gezerah. Going into the antechamber itself is a gezerah because not the oil moed. The oil moed is the hechel. Now we're going to say, oh, we're going to extend another gezerah. Oh, we can't be in the ulam mizbeach. You might go to ulam, and the ulam might go into hechel. We don't do such a thing. So the Gemara rejects the ra'ah. No, maybe I could tell you ulam ubein the ulam mizbeach on the kedusha. Actually, the antechamber and the area between the mizbeach and the ulam, they're all the same sanctity. If you're being geyser in the ulam because you might go into the hechel, that will extend into the ear space between the mizbeach and the ulam for that same gezerah, because they are the same thing and there's nothing in between the mizbeach and the ulam. So we're going to consider this as one thing. And actually, hechel ulam shtei kedusha, I can tell you that the hechel and ulam are two kedushas, and it's one gezerah, because this airspace between ulam and mizbeach is the same thing as the ulam. There's nothing in the way, so it's not raya that the ulam is considered part of the oil moed. Maybe that's only as the gezerah and not part of the primary isser of the yeh oil moed. Now we said in the Mishnah that we were talking about that after he shefted his par, he went to go ahead and do the keteros. So he went up with a shovel to go ahead and get the coals, which you have to burn the incense on in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So every single day they would shovel with a silver shovel, and they would then pour the coals into a gold shovel. Today, they did it straight with a gold shovel. Now, Mike, what's the reason that every single day you have to go ahead and shovel with a silver shovel and then put in the gold shovel? So the Gemara, because the Torah is concerned about a Jewish person's money, as we find by the Mitzvah. They have to get up the klicheres, even though it the Grace Gedilla, the regular kelim you could table. Klicheres, the earthenware vessel, are cheap vessels. You can buy it in the dime store and the Woolworth. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't cost that much. You have to get it out of the thing. Yeah, the Torah is concerned. So therefore, says Rashi, we're also concerned. And shoveling with a golden shovel, it diminishes the vessel when you're shoveling with hot coals. And therefore, it says we're not going to do it with the gold, we're going to do it only with the zilber, we're going to only do it with the silver one, not to ruin the more expensive golden one. And we learned that lesson from the Torah. Now the Mishnah said, but today, the Kohen Gadol, they did straight with a gold shovel. And that's the one that he would shovel with, he would bring that one straight into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. What's the reason today that we didn't do silver to gold? Which is the reason for all those halachas of the Mishnah, because of the weakness of the Kohen Gadol, because it's a tircha for him to have to go in and spill it out from one shovel to another shovel to diminish the amount of effort he has to invest. You let him do it straight with the gold shovel. So too, we said every single day they would do it with a shovel that had 4 kav, and this machlekes Rabbi Yossi says every day was a shovel with a saw. Now, Tana, we learned in the Mishnah Masechet was Tamid that when he would pour from the shovel that had 4 kav, which he used every single day of the year, into the shovel that had 3 kav, so a kav of coals would obviously fall on the floor, because he was pouring from a shovel of 4 kav to 3 kav, and then he would go ahead and he would sweep it into, there was a canal that ran through that Zara, which went out to Nachal Kitchen, he would sweep it into the canal and it would take it out. Now the problem is, Tanachad, we learned in one brace that says, as we just said, kav, that there would be 1 kav of coals that would be dispersed. But the Tanidach kavai, we learned another brace that would actually be 2 kav that would be dispersed. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Mahaf, the Tani kav, we understand the brace that says that it was a kav. That's the Rabbanan, who said that every single day was 4 kav that you would shovel into, and you would pour from that shovel into that of 3 kav. So then there's going to be 1 kav that's going to be on the floor. The one that says that there was 2 kav on the floor, Mani, who's that like? Lo Rabbanan, lo Rabbi Yossi. It's not like the Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan was only 1 kav. And it's not like Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi, there was 3 kav that fell on the floor, because he said use a saw, which is 6 kav, and you poured into a shovel of 3 kav, there would be 3 on the floor. So who's this like? That would be 2 kav of coals on the floor. So Rabbi Chizda, he says, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yechim ben Bereki. The time we learn the Bryce of Shmuel ben Rabbi Yechim ben Bereki, he says, B'shel kabayim hoy machnas. He actually held like the Rabbanan, that you shoveled with a shovel that was 4 kav, but you would pour it into a shovel not of 3 kav. What you brought into the heichel was not a shovel of 3 kav, but you poured it into a shovel that was only 2 kav. So 4 minus 2 is going to be 2 left on the floor, because he would be pouring from 4, like Rabban held. But instead of pouring into a shovel like we would say up until now, was going down of 3 kav, there was only room for that gold shovel of 2 kav. So he'd be left with 2 kav on the floor. That's who that's going like. Or Vashi says, "Now, you could even say this opinion of saying that there's 2 kav left on the floor is going like a BC who holds every single day of the year was done with a shovel that was a saw, which is 6 kav, and you poured into the shovel of 3 kav. The question is, then shouldn't there be 3 kav on the floor? Why is there being 2 kav? So the Gemara says, and this is what he was saying. Every single day, this saw that we said that they were shoveled from, the silver shovel, was a saw midbarius, which is 6 kav midbarius. What happened is that midbarius means from the midbar. When the Jewish people in the desert, there was obviously measurements. When they came to Yerushalayim, they added on a 6 to the measurements. So it came out that 6 midbar kavin was actually 5 Jerusalem kavin, because the measurements got bigger, so that you had less. Instead of being 6, it was now 5. Now, when you shoveled from the Samid Barias, and you poured it into a 3 Jerusalem kavin, so you have 2 Yerushalmi kavin on the floor, because the 6 kavin midbarius is really 5 Yerushalmi kavin. So you take 5 minus 3, because you're pouring into a shovel of 3, you're left with 2 on the floor. So therefore, it could even be that this that we said there was 2 kavin on the floor could be like Rabbi Yisi, because the saw that we were talking about was so midbaris, which is really 5 Yerushalmi kavin pouring into a shovel of 3, you're left with 2 kavin on the floor. Now we said in the Mishnah, every single day the shovel was heavy. Vayim kalam, today was light. Tanu, we learned the Bryce. The reason for this is because every single day, the sides of the shovel were thick. That's why it was heavy. Vayim today it was thin. So to the Mishnah said, every single day the shovel was a short handle. Today was long. Says, what's the reason? So that the arm of the Kohen Gadol could support when he's holding the shovel by his hand, so that the arm underneath could help support that. So to tell them the Bryce, every single day the shovel did not have a neashtik. And today it had a neashtik. Dibri ben Eskan, that's the words of the son of the deputy Kohen Gadol. What's neashtik? So Rashi says neashtik was that it had a ring at the end of the shovel, of the handle, where it would make noise and as it moved, and that's the reason, because it says in Shemesh Chavches that the sound of the Kohen Gadol was heard when he came into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So when he was taking in the shovel, it made the noise. Places brings in the Yisham, the other interpretation that it had like a cover that shouldn't get burnt, but that's how Rashi says it. Now, we said in the Mishnah, every single day, the gold was yellow. Now, related to that, Amr of Chizda, and we said, but on Yom Kippur, it was red gold. So Amr of Chizda says, Shiva Zahav Mein, there were 7 types of gold. There are 7 types of gold in the world. You have Zahav, regular gold. You have Zahav type, you have good gold. You have, like it says in Malachim Al, Zahav Eifir. You have over there, it says there in the Pasuk, Zahav Mupas, and it says there in the Pasuk, Zahav Shachad. You have Zahav Sagar, as it says there in the Pasuk. And then you have finally, it says in Dibba Yom Beis, Zahav Parvam. The Gemara explains all these 7 types of gold. Zahav is Zahav Tayyib, that there's regular gold and good gold, which are the first 2 types of gold. That's the story, it says the Pasuk in Bereshit. It says Zahav Aretz HaHitay. The gold of that land, that was good. Now, obviously, we've been saying that's good gold. The inference is that there's regular gold. So we see from the Torah 2 types of gold. What's Zahav Eifir? Is the Asim Eifir would come from this place called Eifir. And then what's Zahav Mukpaz? That's as we continue top of the Meham and Aleph, Shadaim Lapaz. It's similar to jewels. It shines like pearls. Zahav Shachad, what's that? Shenitva Kachut. The word Shachad is chut, shechut. That it's spun like a thread because it's so thin. What's Zahav Sagar? What's closed gold? The stores that open up that sell this type of gold, all the other stores shut down because no one else could sell gold because of this gold, this Zahav Sagar that's so precious. All the other stores shut down. And the final one is Zahav Parvan, which is similar to the blood of bulls, which that's what we said that today on Yom Kippurim, the Machta was red. That's this precious gold of Zahav Parvan, which is similar to the blood of Parvan. That's one interpretation. Rabbi Shloimy says, no, actually, chamisha, there's only 5 types of gold, not 7. Cholchad v'chad is bezav type. And every one of these 5 types of gold have regular gold and good gold. So it's not like gold and good gold are 2 different types. Those are qualifications in these other 5 types. It says in the Brisa that because that gold is similar to the blood of parim of bulls, that's why the gold is called zahav parvim, like we said in the pasuk in Daf Yomi, because it says b'chol yom every single day zahav yark, that the gold was yellow of the shovel. Yom adam today the gold was red. Behind and that's zahav parvam. That's the gold of parvam, which is red. Shadem l'dam parvam because it's similar to the blood of the bulls. Something to discuss in today's Daf in Yoma Daf Mem Daf. We said that when it says that after he shechted the par, he gave it to someone to mix the blood, and he was on the Roibid Revi, on the 4th row, we said obviously it wasn't Sheba Heichel, as the words of the Mishnah sounded like that, it was in the 4th row of the Heichel. It must have been meant Shel Heichel, meaning when you're coming out of the Heichel, because the halach is actually that and which was the primary theme of the Daf, that forbidden to be in the oil moed at the time of the Keteris. How do we know it's referring to the Keteris? Because it's a kapara that all of Klal Yisrael has, and the pasuk says v'chiba ba'adav be'yisrael ba'ad kol Klal Yisrael, which that's only by Keteris because the Matan Damim they actually don't have all the same. The Kanim are from the Par, the Yisrael are from the Sar. So no one's allowed to be in the Yomay in Shas Keteris. Obviously, he wasn't mixing the blood there in the Heichel. Now we also know that it refers to in the Beis Hamikdash because it says B'Kodesh, not only in the Oil Moed, because it says B'Kodesh. And the same thing is also even at the time of the Matan Damim, no one's allowed to be there because there's L'chaper comes to include the kapara of the Damim. Now at the time of the Keteris, the Mishnah Masechtas came and said you also have to separate not only as the biblical law is from the Heichel, you also have to separate from the area that's bein ulam lemizbech. Now, Rebbe Lazar, he qualified this, and he says this is only at the time of the Heichel, not at the Keteris that's done in the Kippurim of Navafim, because that's very far. That we're not concerned that you're going to walk it all the way over there. Now, the difference is by the Heichel, that's more elevated than in ulam mizbech. You have to separate whether it's own haktara or whether shaloi b'shas haktara, which we ultimately explained meant not its own Keteris, but the Keteris of Lefnai Lefnim of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And that same differentiation that you have between the Heichel and the Bein Mizbech, you also have by Matan Damim. And why didn't we mention that? Because like we said, that's Shem Prisha Achasi, it's the same idea that you only have to separate what's near you and not what's further away, all the way by the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And additionally, we have, how do we know that you have to separate for the blood of a Parkoi Mashiach and Helm Davish Al-Tzib and Sirah B'Dizara from, in general, and moreover from Bein Ulam Mizbech, that we learn out from a Gzera Shava of Kapara from Yom Kippurim, which by those Kabbanis is Kapara, by Yom Kippurim is Kapara, and just like by Yom Kippurim you have to separate, so too, by those Kabbanis you have to also be Mafresh. And not only Matan Dam Yom Kippurim, which again we learned from L'chaper, but even those Kabbanis too. Now, the Gemara said, rejected 2 attempts to bring rayas from the halacha that we brought. There's no proof that milas that we have from the Mishnah of Masechtas Kelim that are deraisa, to say that this area is higher and higher than the other one. And that's why, we find a difference between Bein Ulam Mizbech and the rest of the Azara, because if it's not deraisa, if it's just rabbinic, so you should have to separate rabbinically from the whole Azara. No, you could say it's rabbinic, but you could say that it would depend if there's something in the way where it should be recognizable, but you shouldn't walk in. If it's Bein Ulam Mizbech, you could just walk right in. Here you have the Mizbech on the way, that's why we separated the area. Additionally, we said that there's no raya that to say that the Kedushas Ulam and the Heichel is the same. Because if not, then Bein Ulam Mizbech is Gzer, because the Ulam is not the Heichel, and then you say Bein Ulam Mizbech. So why would we say, obviously Ulam is considered the same as the Heichel? So no, you could say the Bein Ulam Mizbech and the Ulam, that they're the same thing. And the Heichel is the only one. And once we're saying the Ulam is forbidden, the Bein Ulam Mizbech is considered the same area as that. We said in the Mishnah that every single day that they would use a silver shovel. Why not gold? Even though you're pouring it into gold, because the Torah is chassid, so to us, on Mamon Yisrael, and today was straight with gold because the Kayin Gadol is weak. Every single day they would use a shovel of 4 kavan, and then it got dispersed, how many? Either 3 kavan like Rabbi Yossi, or a kav like Drabanan, or kavayim. Who's that going like? So that is either like the Rabbanan, because you would pour it into that of kavayim, not of 3 kav. The golden shovel only had 2 kav, like Shmuel ben Neshek and Bereka. Or it's even like Rabbi Yasi, because we're talking about that when you took a saw, it was a saw midbarius, and you poured it into gimel kav and Yerushalmis, which that's actually 5 kav and not 6 kav. And therefore, 5 minus 3 is actually going to be 2 kav. We said every single day the walls, the sides of the shovel were thick, and that's why it was heavy. Today it was thin, and therefore it was lighter. Every single day the shovel was short, today it was longer because one has arms to support him. Today, unlike every day, the shovel had a ring on it that it made noise. Every single day the gold was yellow, today it was red. That's what we said, there's either 7 or 5 types of gold, and one of them is the red gold, which is the dam haparim, which was similar to the dam of the parim, which was the color of the gold. And Kippurim's shovel. Thank you for anything for hosting.